August 1993, Bucharest National Stadium. 70,000 fans were witnessing Michael Jackson's most iconic performance of the Dangerous World Tour. But then, during Billie Jean, something happened that nobody saw coming. A young woman in the front row collapsed, and what Michael did next, stopping his performance mid-moonwalk, would become the most talked about moment in concert history. But the real story, it wasn't about the collapse at all. It was about what Michael saw in her eyes that made him stop everything. The Bucharest National Stadium was alive with an energy that could power the entire city. 70,000 voices singing in unison, 70,000 hearts beating to the rhythm of pop music's greatest icon. The date was August 31st, 1993, and Michael Jackson was delivering what many would later call the performance of a lifetime during his Dangerous World Tour. Michael had been preparing for this moment for months. Romania was still emerging from decades of communist isolation, and this concert represented something far more significant than entertainment. It was a symbol of freedom, of cultural connection, of the universal language that music provides regardless of political boundaries or historical wounds. But what nobody in that stadium knew was that Michael was carrying a weight that had nothing to do with the performance itself. 3 days earlier, the first allegations that would eventually haunt the rest of his life had begun to surface in American media. Michael's management team had worked desperately to keep the news from spreading internationally, wanting to preserve this tour that had taken years to plan. Michael himself had insisted on continuing, believing that his connection with fans, real, genuine, human connection, was more important than the noise of tabloid accusations. He was different that night, recalled Jennifer Martinez, Michael's backup dancer who had worked with him for 5 years. During our pre-show warm-up, Michael kept looking at himself in the mirror, not checking his appearance like usual, but really looking, like he was trying to remember who he was beneath all the fame and controversy. The performance had started perfectly. Jam opened the show with explosive energy, Michael's signature dance moves sharper than ever, his vocals crystal clear despite the emotional turbulence beneath the surface. The crowd responded with a fervor that shook the stadium's foundation. These fans, many of whom had saved for months to afford tickets, were witnessing their first major Western concert after years of cultural isolation. As the show progressed through Wannabe Startin' Somethin' and Human Nature, Michael seemed to feed off the crowd's energy, each song building toward the moment everyone was waiting for, Billie Jean, the song that had defined his career and revolutionized music videos forever. But as the iconic bass line began to pulse through the stadium's massive speakers, Michael noticed something that made his performer's instinct suddenly alert. In the front row, directly in his line of sight, a young woman in her early 20s was swaying unsteadily. Her name was Elena Constantinescu, though Michael didn't know that yet. What he could see, even from the stage, was that something was wrong. While everyone around her was jumping and screaming with excitement, Elena's movements were becoming slower, more disjointed, her face pale even under the bright stadium lights. Michael had developed an almost supernatural awareness of his audience over his decades of performing. He could sense energy shifts, could spot individuals in distress even in crowds of hundreds of thousands. It was a skill born from both genuine empathy and years of experience managing the intense emotional reactions his performances often triggered. As he began his moonwalk, the move that had made him a global phenomenon, Michael kept his eyes on Elena. He saw her knees buckle slightly, saw her hand reach out to grip the barrier in front of her, saw the people around her beginning to notice that something was wrong, and then in a moment that would be replayed millions of times across the world, Michael Jackson did something unprecedented. He stopped dancing, mid-moonwalk. The music continued, but Michael stood completely still, his hand raised in a gesture that his band had learned over years of working together. Stop everything. The band, confused but well-trained, began to fade out the music. 70,000 people fell into confused silence, the sudden absence of sound almost painful after the thundering volume of moments before. Security personnel, scattered throughout the venue, immediately went on high alert, scanning for threats, trying to understand why the performance had stopped. Elena, in the front row, was now barely standing. Her friends on either side of her were holding her up, their faces showing panic and confusion. The stadium's medical team was already moving toward her location, but they were having trouble navigating through the tightly packed crowd. Michael, still on stage, spoke into his microphone, his voice calm but carrying clear authority. "Please, everyone remain calm. We have someone who needs help. Medical team, front row, left side of the stage. Everyone else, please give them space." But what happened next shocked everyone in that stadium, including Michael's own security team. Instead of waiting on stage for medical personnel to handle the situation, Michael jumped down into the crowd. It was a move that violated every security protocol his team had spent years implementing, a spontaneous decision that could have resulted in a dangerous crowd surge, and a moment of genuine human compassion that transcended the performer-audience barrier that usually defined his concerts. Michael's head of security, James Rodriguez, would later describe the moment with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. My heart stopped. We had plans for every possible scenario. Equipment failure, weather emergencies, even terrorist threats. But Michael jumps into a crowd of 70,000 people to help a collapsed fan. That wasn't in any of our playbooks. As Michael made his way through the crowd toward Elena, something remarkable happened. The people around him, instead of rushing forward or trying to touch him, instinctively created a protective circle. They had seen him stop his own performance to help someone, and they understood that this moment was about something more important than getting a photo or an autograph. When Michael reached Elena, she was semi-conscious, her eyes unfocused, her breathing shallow. He knelt beside her, and the stadium's big screens captured his face, not the face of a superstar, but the face of one human being concerned for another. "What's your name?" Michael asked gently, his hand on her shoulder. "Elena," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Elena, you're going to be okay. The medical team is almost here. Just breathe with me, okay? In and out. You're safe." But as Michael spoke those words, Elena said something that would change the entire meaning of this moment. "I'm not sick," Elena whispered, tears beginning to stream down her face. I couldn't believe you're real. You're actually real. For so many years we could only imagine what the outside world was like, what freedom looked like, what joy felt like. And now you're here, and it's just too much, too beautiful. I didn't know joy could feel this overwhelming." Michael's expression, captured in perfect clarity by the stadium cameras, shifted from concern to something deeper, understanding, empathy, and a profound sadness that this young woman had lived so much of her life without the basic freedoms he had always taken for granted. The medical team arrived moments later, but Michael didn't immediately move away. He stayed kneeling beside Elena, holding her hand, speaking softly to her while paramedics checked her vital signs and determined that she was experiencing an intense emotional and physiological reaction to the overwhelming stimulation of the concert, not uncommon in their line of work, but particularly poignant given Romania's recent history. "She's going to be fine," one of the paramedics told Michael in broken English. "Just overwhelmed, emotional. She needs water and to sit down for a while." Michael nodded, but he didn't let go of Elena's hand. "Elena, they're going to take you to a quiet place backstage where you can rest. But I want to ask you something. When you're feeling better, would you like to talk to me? Really talk, I mean, about your life, about what it was like here before, about everything." Elena stared at him, unable to comprehend that this was actually happening. You want to talk to me?" "Yes," Michael said simply, "because I think you have a story that matters. And because," he paused, his voice becoming softer, "because sometimes I forget what my music means to people. Sometimes I get lost in all the other noise. You just reminded me why I do this." As the medical team helped Elena to her feet and began escorting her backstage, Michael stood up and faced the 70,000 people who had been watching this entire interaction in silent awe. What he said next would become one of the most quoted moments in concert history. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael spoke into his microphone, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive stadium. "I need to tell you something. For the past few days, I've been struggling with some difficult things happening in my life. Things that have made me question whether any of this matters. Whether performing and making music has any real meaning in a world that seems determined to focus on negativity and rumors rather than art and connection." The crowd was absolutely silent. This level of personal revelation from Michael Jackson, who was famous for guarding his privacy fiercely, was unprecedented. But Elena just reminded me of something I should never have forgotten. Music isn't about me. It's not about my problems, or the gossip, or any of that noise. Music is about connection. It's about reminding us that we're not alone, that we're all human beings experiencing the same emotions, the same joys and struggles regardless of where we come from or what language we speak. Michael paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "For years, Elena and all of you here in Romania lived under a system that tried to control what you could hear, what you could see, what you could feel. Music was regulated, joy was suspicious, freedom was a dangerous dream, but you never stopped being human. You never stopped feeling. And now we're here together, and I can see in your faces what Elena just showed me, that music, real music, has the power to overwhelm us with the simple reminder that being alive, feeling things deeply, connecting with other humans, that's what matters." Tears were visible on faces throughout the stadium. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was catharsis, communal and profound. So tonight, we're not just going to finish this concert. We're going to celebrate. We're going to celebrate Elena's courage to feel so deeply, We're going to celebrate your freedom to be here. We're going to celebrate the fact that no matter what darkness any of us is facing, music can bring us together and remind us that love is stronger than fear. The applause that erupted was unlike anything the stadium had ever heard. It wasn't the screaming excitement of typical fan worship. It was something deeper: recognition, gratitude, shared humanity. But Michael wasn't finished. He made a decision in that moment that would define the rest of the concert and change the trajectory of his relationship with his audience forever. "I'm going to do something I've never done before," Michael announced. "Tonight, I'm not just going to perform for you. I'm going to perform with you. This isn't Michael Jackson's concert anymore. This is our concert. So I want to hear you sing. I want to hear you become part of the music, because that's what this is really about. All of us together, creating something beautiful." What followed was unlike any concert Michael had ever performed. Instead of the carefully choreographed, precisely timed performance that his tours were famous for, Michael turned Billie Jean into a conversation between himself and the audience. He would sing a line, and then he would point the microphone toward the crowd, and 70,000 voices would sing the next line back to him. The raw emotion in the stadium was palpable. People were crying, embracing strangers beside them, singing with voices hoarse from emotion rather than excitement. The carefully maintained fourth wall between performer and audience had completely dissolved. Michael's backup dancers, who had rehearsed every move thousands of times, found themselves improvising, responding to the energy in the stadium rather than following their practiced choreography. Even the band, professional musicians who had performed Billie Jean hundreds of times, found themselves playing differently, responding to the emotional intensity of the moment. And then, something happened that Michael's team would later say they had never seen before in all their years of working with him. Michael stopped singing entirely. He stood at the front of the stage, microphone at his side, and simply listened. 70,000 people continued singing Billie Jean without him, their voices carrying the melody, their collective energy creating something that transcended any individual performance. Tears streamed openly down Michael's face. His shoulders shook with emotion. For a man who had spent his entire life performing, who had been in the spotlight since he was 5 years old, who had built an entire identity around being the consummate entertainer, this moment of simply receiving, of being the audience to his audience, was transformative. That was the moment Michael found himself again. His vocal coach Seth Riggs would later reflect. "I had watched him struggle with his identity, with the pressure, with the accusations, and the isolation. But that night in Bucharest, he remembered who he was beneath all of that. He was a human being who had dedicated his life to creating connections through music. And he saw that it had worked. It had really truly worked." When the song ended, Michael stood silent for nearly a minute, just absorbing the moment. Then he spoke, his voice raw with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you for reminding me why I'm here. Thank you for being brave enough to feel things deeply, even when it's overwhelming. Thank you for showing me that despite everything, all the noise, all the darkness, music still matters. Connection still matters. Love still matters." The concert continued, but it had transformed into something none of the 70,000 people present would ever forget. Backstage, after the concert ended, Michael did something that surprised his entire team. Instead of the usual immediate retreat to his dressing room to decompress, he insisted on meeting with Elena and hearing her story in full. Elena, now recovered and sitting in a quiet backstage area with water and a light meal, couldn't believe that Michael Jackson was actually sitting across from her, genuinely interested in her life story. "Tell me everything," Michael said simply. "What was it like growing up here? What did freedom mean to you? What made tonight so overwhelming?" Elena, speaking through a translator that Michael's team had quickly arranged, began to share her story. She described growing up in communist Romania, where Western music was forbidden, where a single Beatles record could land someone in prison, where the simple act of listening to Radio Free Europe was an act of rebellion. "We had nothing," Elena explained, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "No color, no joy, no music except what the state approved. And then, when I was 16, my uncle smuggled in a cassette tape. It was your Thriller album. I had to listen to it with the volume so low, late at night, with blankets over my head so neighbors wouldn't hear." Michael listened with complete attention, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. "That music," Elena continued, tears beginning again. "It was like discovering that color existed when you'd only ever seen black and white. It was proof that somewhere in the world, people were free to create beauty, to express joy, to be fully alive. Your voice became my secret act of rebellion. Every night, I would listen to that worn-out tape and remember that freedom was real, even if I couldn't touch it yet." Michael's response to Elena's story would reshape how he approached his entire career going forward. "Elena," Michael said softly, reaching across to take her hand, "you just gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You reminded me that music isn't just entertainment, it's survival, it's hope, it's resistance against everything that tries to make us less human. I've been feeling sorry for myself, drowning in my own problems, forgetting that my music, our music, the music we create together, it matters in ways I can't even fully understand." He paused, visibly composing himself. "I want to do something. I want to create a foundation that brings music education to places where it's been restricted or inaccessible. I want to make sure that no child ever has to smuggle joy into their lives. I want freedom and beauty and music to be accessible to everyone, everywhere." And Michael kept his promise. Within 6 months, the Heal the World Foundation expanded its mission specifically to include music education in former communist countries. But the impact of that night in Bucharest extended far beyond charitable initiatives. Michael's entire approach to performing changed. He began incorporating more moments of direct audience connection into every show, breaking the fourth wall intentionally to create spaces for shared humanity rather than just spectacular entertainment. His security team had to completely revise their protocols because Michael insisted on maintaining the possibility of spontaneous audience interaction. "What's the point of being protected?" Michael told them, "if I'm protected from the very thing that makes this meaningful." The video footage of the Bucharest concert, particularly the moment when Michael stopped the show for Elena, became one of the most watched concert recordings in history. But more importantly, it became a teaching tool. Universities used it in courses on emotional intelligence and authentic leadership. Therapists used it to illustrate the power of genuine human connection. Leadership consultants analyzed Michael's ability to transform a potential crisis into a moment of profound meaning. Elena herself became a music therapist, dedicating her life to helping others understand the healing power of music. She and Michael maintained correspondence for years, their relationship evolving from that one transformative night into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared understanding of music's power to transcend circumstances and connect human souls. "People always ask me if that night was real," Elena said in a 2019 interview. "They wonder if it was staged, if Michael knew who I was beforehand, if it was all calculated for publicity. But I was there. I felt his genuine concern. I heard his voice break when I told him my story. That was real." Michael Jackson taught me that sometimes the most powerful moments in life are the ones that aren't planned, the ones where we simply show up fully human for each other. The documentary that was being filmed during the Dangerous tour captured the aftermath of the Bucharest concert. In raw, unedited footage that wouldn't be released until years later, Michael can be seen alone in his dressing room, still in his performance clothing, sitting quietly with his head in his hands. His director approached carefully. "Michael, are you okay?" Michael looked up, his face streaked with tears, but smiling. "I'm better than okay. I just remembered why I do this. I just remembered what matters." The ripple effects of that single moment continue to this day. Music therapists around the world point to the Bucharest concert as evidence of music's power to heal trauma and create connection across even the deepest divides. The foundation Michael established has brought music education to more than 2 million children in countries recovering from oppression or conflict. But perhaps the most powerful legacy is simpler. The reminder that beneath all the fame, all the spectacle, all the noise, there are human beings trying to connect with other human beings. And sometimes, the most profound moments come when we simply stop what we're doing and see each other, really see each other, as the vulnerable, brave, beautiful humans we all are. This incredible story reminds us that our greatest moments often come not from our successes, but from our willingness to be fully present with other human beings in their most vulnerable moments. Michael Jackson could have continued his performance that night. He could have let security handle Elena's collapse. He could have maintained the professional distance that celebrities are expected to keep. Instead, he chose connection. He chose to be human. And in doing so, he created a moment that touched 70,000 people in that stadium and millions more around the world. How do we show up for others in their vulnerable moments? What would change in our lives if we prioritize genuine connection over professional distance? What matters more, the show we're performing, or the humans we're performing for? If this story moved you, if it reminded you of what really matters in life, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember that being human, messy, emotional, vulnerable, and compassionate is more important than being perfect. Subscribe and ring that notification bell because we have more incredible stories that prove love conquers fear, connection transcends circumstance, and sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply stop everything and show up for another human being. Until next time, remember, the greatest performances aren't the ones we plan. They're the ones where we forget the script and simply respond with love.